Hello, everyone. I'm Reverend Nick Bullitt, the engagement catalyst here at One Spirit, and I am sitting here today with Reverend Chelsea MacMillan. How are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for meeting with us today. We're here to talk about your upcoming workshop, and I'd love to ask you a couple of questions. Your workshop is focused on sacred activism. Can you define for us your definition of what sacred activism is?
It's a sacred path in and of itself. It's a sacred path to see the divine in each other. It's a sacred path to really find out what radical nonviolence means and to look at your quote unquote enemy as someone or a group of people or a government who's actually in your circle of love. And how can you do that in the most radical way possible? It's not just, like let's all hold hands and pretend we're friends. Being in community, being radically nonviolent with each other, it is really hard work. And so the sacred path, and for me it's been a way in which I commune with God, with spirit. It's a way in which I find out what I'm called to be in this world and live in this world. It's the realization that personal transformation and social transformation are never one without the other. They're totally inextricably intertwined.
If you could share with us a little bit about your professional and spiritual background that called you to become a sacred activist.
There's so much happening in the world that is calling me forward and calling, I think, many of us into action. It's like the cries of the earth and the cries of the world. We're all called to respond to those cries in the way that we're each called. So there is something about my professional and spiritual background that has always had all of these clues about how I'm here to respond to the many crises. I think that's part of being a sacred activist, is finding the way that we are called. People all the time are saying, how can I help? How can I help? And it's like you can walk outside your door and there are a million and one ways to help. What we're actually asking is, what do I have to offer? What do I have to give to the world or to this one thing that breaks my heart? And as an activist and organizer with Extinction Rebellion, it's a climate justice movement, I've sort of helped take part in leading a whole bunch of direct actions where we're like marching down the street, and but also as a spiritual director and as a minister, I find that my ministry is really manifesting itself in the organizing that I'm doing, and being able to work with a group of people and really deeply listen to what they're saying and the things that they're not saying behind what they're actually saying, and ask the kinds of questions that can move them forward in a more expansive way.
And so, what inspired you to create this specific workshop that's focused on sacred activism?
So it's part impatience and part inspiration. Here are all these amazing teachings that we're learning and integrating into our lives. So much of the time they're being used for like our personal stress relief, which isn't bad, but like we can't just sit on our yoga mats and be the change. And that, yes, like the world is one, we are all one. And so how do we actually realize that truth and make it manifest in the world and changing the world with those teachings?
Mhm. Do you feel like a holistic perspective is missing from activism?
Oh, absolutely. Definitely a holistic perspective and an integrative or integral perspective. When I was experiencing all these frustrations in my spiritual communities, I was at the same time experiencing and still experience frustration with activist communities that tend to get really bogged down in cynicism and blame and really rigid ideologies. Looking at ourselves more holistically, looking at our communities more holistically, and looking at the planet more holistically, I think is absolutely what we need.
Right. And burnout is a huge issue with activists. And is there something in your workshop that speaks to alleviating that feeling of overwhelm or burnout?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you asked that question, because this is also something that comes up a lot in activist communities. And short answer is yes. It's like a yes and. Absolutely, let's use our spiritual practices to address the burnout that is rampant in activism and is rampant in the helping professions and all of these things. And using questions to open up a space that is more inspirational and more vibrant and juicier. You know, sacred activism isn't just let's meditate and then go march in the streets and then we get burnt out and then we go meditate again so that we can refuel our tanks. Like, no. I mean, is that how we view spiritual practice? Like, it's so much more than that. It's about how we're really listening to something greater than ourselves. That's really what we will be exploring in the class, is something that's much more juicy and something that's actually will keep on regenerating and creating in and out of itself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love the word juicy.
Yeah.
So, can you walk us through what the workshop will look like across the weeks?
Technically, it's 5 weeks elapsed. We have the American election day in the middle of our class, so we're not going to meet that night because you will be taking yourself to the election polls
That's
and
right.
being a sacred activist there. We're really going to get real with the crisis at hand. And when I say the crisis, I mean the many crises that we're in, but they're all totally interrelated. So the first class is going to be getting really, really real with that, because we can't really be sacred activists unless we're really looking at the shadows and digging in deep. And we need a real view of what's happening. We will go over a sacred activism theory of change. So we'll talk about sort of the three pillars of holy imagination, holy heartbreak, and holy rebellion, and how those show up in our lives and how we integrate those into a more holistic path of activism. We'll also explore our own callings and how to live out our own callings and what we're each called to do. And then the last part will be sort of closing it up and really having some clear steps about how to move forward as we all move into the world to continue living out our callings.
What would you like for participants to walk away from your workshop?
I would love for participants to walk away with a sense of that juice for themselves, to really not only have a clear sense of their vocation and the ways in which that they're called to move forward into the world, but also to really view activism as a sacred path. I hope that people can walk away with a sense of that, really connected to something greater than themselves, really fired up to do something in a different way than they've done before, and to be inspired by other people who are doing the same thing.